morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be in Ireland, one of my favorite places to visit, and I'm enjoying the visit once again, and I am responsible for the good weather. I'm taking credit for that. Alex, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am really honored to be at the first inaugural session of the Private Hospital Association here in Ireland, in Dublin. And I've been given 20 minutes to talk to you about continuous improvement in healthcare quality. And I'm going to do my best to do that, and somebody needs to, give me a 5-minute warning, because this is a topic that could take more than 20 minutes. And I'm going to start out just giving a brief introduction. I know we have a lot of colleagues in the room. The Joint Commission International has a good presence in Ireland, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But I want to start with our mission. We are a not-for-profit organization. That doesn't mean that we don't charge for our services, but it means that our legal status in the United States means, from a tax perspective, we are mission-driven, and our mission really is about patient safety and quality. Joint Commission International is a part of the Joint Commission in the United States, and we've been accrediting hospitals since 1950. The Joint Commission International has been around for about 20 years. And we have a pretty big presence in the country. We do business in 90 countries. We accredit, however, in about 66 countries right now. And that number changes on a regular basis because the JCI accreditation program grows every year. Very steady 10 to 20% increases over the years in different parts of the country. Our headquarters are in the United States. We're just outside of Chicago. We have an office in Dubai, we have an office in Singapore, and most recently we have established an office now in Beijing as the China market begins to really grow, and we have to have more of a presence there. We're close to 1,000 accredited organizations around the world, and the majority are hospitals, although we have accreditation programs for ambulatory care, long-term care, home care, primary care. And in Ireland, we have a very strong presence in terms of the hospitals. Our numbers are different. I have 16, you had, I think, 18. I'll take the higher number. But we also have a small presence here in ambulatory care and long-term care. We'd like to build that up. We've been working in Ireland for many years. It's a country that's been with JCI for a long time now, and we're hoping to continue to expand here. So continuous improvement. And I thought about this a lot because this is a huge topic. We have a chapter in the United States on patient safety systems that really are meant to drive continuous improvement. And the chapter alone is something like 55 pages. And so I tried to figure out what's the best way to talk to a room of leaders in healthcare in Ireland about this notion of continuous improvement. And there are lots of tools and lots of methods and lots of all kinds of ways of thinking about it. But one of the things we talk about at the Joint Commission and JCI is that we talk about it in terms of being ready for the next patient as opposed to the next survey. Because one of the weaknesses that I will certainly admit to in accreditation is that it's a 3-year cycle. So we'll come in and do a survey, and then 3 years later we come back and do another survey. And there's almost a perfect bell curve in terms of where an organization is in terms of compliance with the standards on that 3-year time frame. So right around the point of the survey, and ours are predictable, you pretty much know, we schedule them with you so you know when we're coming, there's a very high degree of proficiency in terms of meeting the standards and everything being in tip-top shape, ready for the survey. But if you look at it, what's happening over 18 months, the midpoint, the compliance actually goes down. There's a dip, and then as the date of the next survey approaches, there is an increase. So that's why we say you really need to be ready for the next patient, not for the next survey, which is kind of encapsulates for me the notion of continuous improvement and being ready all the time, not just because there's a survey coming up. It requires an organization-wide system of patient safety, and I'll talk more about that. And I'm going to mostly talk today about accountability and leadership, because that's to us, to me, and to all of the work that we're doing right now, is the crux where a lot of this happens. So we're going to be going way away from the national policy discussion that's been going on, and really coming down to you, personally, you who hold leadership positions in healthcare organizations, and how do we think about ourselves as leaders and what we do on a day-to-day basis? Because this is very difficult to be in a constant state of continuous competence, really. We're talking a lot in the Joint Commission today about high reliability and how can we make healthcare more like the airline industry, more like nuclear power, more like aircraft carriers, really complex businesses that have very, very few errors. What do we learn from them? And one of the things we learn from them is that leadership is a key part of success in terms of having small amounts of any kind of errors and harm. And I'm not going to get into the statistics. I think anyone who is running a hospital today knows that we have a lot of harm. We have routine things like hand hygiene that fail routinely, and we have spectacular events that are rare but are catastrophic, like wrong site surgery. And that's happening every day in every hospital around the globe. I travel extensively. I've been in a lot of countries, and I've worked in healthcare in the United States for many years, and there are no hospitals that are anywhere near what an airline industry is like. So these are our typical slides, and they're kind of boring. It has all the things that we need to think about in terms of patient safety systems. And then we get into the leadership must, and so understand why and how of your current operations, create a vision for change, be disciplined, walk in the patient experience, all very good. And Kathleen, could you give me a glass of water? I meant to bring that up. I get very animated. Thank you so much. I need this because this is the really good part that's coming up now. So all of this, I don't want to do that kind of discussion today. I started out doing that. The slides are in the deck. I really want to talk about leadership. And Bill, thank you for the invitation, said I could talk about anything I wanted to. And so I think this is the issue that we need to talk about in this room, on this event, in this day. And I really want to talk about that last item, leadership and cues. Alec mentioned that I used to teach a course in corporate internal controls and corporate compliance. And when I taught that years ago, I learned about this notion of leadership cues. And in the financial management world, what they teach and what I used to teach is that you as the leader need to be aware of how important your personal behaviors are in terms of driving the culture and methods and activities of the rest of the people that work in the organization. And one of the things that I think we don't remember enough is that the people who work for us, and I'm a boss, we have about 150 people in the office in Illinois and another 150 out in the field, they're watching all the bosses about what do they do every day. And in the financial world, what they're watching for is do you follow the rules of internal controls? So use of company equipment, use of cars, filing the right reports, doing all of those things according to policies and procedures. People are watching us, our staff are watching us for all kinds of behavioral cues so they understand what they can and cannot do. And this is really relevant, I think, if you take it into the patient safety and quality arena. Because what we as leaders do in terms of behavior will drive the culture and behavior of an organization. So what do you talk about? I've gotten negative feedback. I talk too much about business because we're not-for-profits, and in the United States, not-for-profits are notorious for being bad at business. We talk about the mission, which is critical, but if you do not have a positive P&L, there is no mission. And so I've really pushed too much in that way, and I'm trying to go back and remember that we really exist because of patients and patient safety in your organizations. But I'm pleased to report that we have a positive operating margin these days, and we have to have that in order to survive. But you have to listen to what are you talking about? How do you spend your time? Look at your calendar. Where are you during the day? That'll give you some insight. And where I'm going with this is what you spend your time on and what you talk about will push into the culture and into the conversation of the staff about what's important inside of this organization. And so if we're getting back to continuous improvement and quality and safety, if you never talk about quality and safety and you don't pay attention to it as a leader, you're giving the staff the permission to not think about it a lot too. So again, this notion of continuous improvement, constant consideration of quality starts and ends with leadership. So one of the things we ask often is, what do you talk about when you get your senior staff together? What's the first thing on the agenda? Most organizations have monthly, weekly, quarterly, monthly, all those meetings that we go to endlessly. They have fairly standard agendas. What's the number one thing on the agenda when you get together with your senior staff? Is it the last financial reports, or is it something that's going on in terms of patients? We ask a lot in terms of, in American hospitals, my boss, Mark Chasson, will say, when the board meets, what's the first thing they talk about? If you're striving for high reliability and trying to get to zero harm in terms of patients, a good thing to start the meeting with is the last major harm that occurred. And how did you deal with that as an organization? What happened in the aftermath of when a patient was harmed? And that's an interesting, these are the cues that we're sending. So if you don't talk about patient safety, you don't talk about quality, and you're not aware of the culture, you're giving a signal to the staff that maybe this isn't as important as I know you think it is. One of the key aspects of this is who gets to break the rules. Does anybody get to break the rules? We're notorious in I always blame the surgeons. Are there any surgeons in the room? They're not admitting it. But, there's a regular story that if there's a really, really high-powered surgeon who brings a lot of revenue in, do they have the same set of rules as the person who cleans the floor? Because that talks about the culture. And one of the lines that I really enjoy and I think helps us understand this is, your culture is the worst behavior that you tolerate. That's how your staff see it. So what you do, how you act, you have anger, bursts, and swearing and on kinds of behaviors, you're starting to send a cue that that's okay, and that's how, that behavior is okay for everyone. I think we've seen a really interesting example of when CEO behavior, not so much individual behavior, but the guy who just stepped down from the Uber CEO job. I don't know that he did anything in terms of all of the accusations in terms of the culture in Uber regarding sexual harassment and things like that, but he tolerated it. It was going on. He could not have known about it in terms of the number of lawsuits. And he stepped down because it's obvious he knew about it. So, think about what you're aware of, what you tolerate, and what that looks like to the whole organization, because that gets to the culture. And what we're trying to build is a culture of safety that really is the basis for improving in terms of outcomes. How do you deal with sentinel events and adverse events? We have a terrible kind of culture around those things in the health industry. It's not one person in this instance. The industry tends to obviously react to sentinel and adverse events, but very often we have a blame culture versus an analytical culture. If you think about the typical types of harm that go on, hand hygiene that results in infection, medication management, patient safety, misidentification, falls, miscommunications as patients move around a hospital. All of those are high-risk kinds of activities that create opportunities for mistakes. And I always talk about a nurse who's doing a medication, delivering a medication, a prescription to a patient, and there's an error. And the nurse takes the blame for that, usually. In the American hospitals around the world, the nurse becomes the point of blame for the mistake. Whereas usually it's a process error. There are human errors, but they very often result from weak processes. Nurses get interrupted every 10 seconds or so. So if you don't have a good process for medication getting to where the nurse is and having a place for the nurse to fill a prescription and deliver a prescription that's safe, you're probably going to have those kinds of errors. But what happens in healthcare, partially because of the legal issues and the pressures that we are under in that regard, the person who makes the mistake, the surgeon who does the wrong site surgery, the nurse who does the wrong prescription, they take the blame for what really is a process error. So we encourage leaders to really think about sentinel and adverse events as opportunities to learn from, to correct the process. We're learning that surgical site errors, wrong patient, wrong site, start in the office of the surgeon as the scheduling is being done, days ahead of the surgery. Sometimes that will contribute to an error. So we need to get out of this blame culture and start to really get into an analytical learning culture about why did the mistake happen, why did the harm happen, and how do we fix the process and not blame the individual. And that really is a leadership function. You're the only people that can do that. You can't do that from the bottom up. It has to be from the top down. So one of the things we want to create is a safety culture. And I've got a slide here that kind of summarizes some of this in case I run out of time. So if you have leadership at the top, which is what your role is, and you create the culture where people are comfortable reporting the mistakes. Thank you. Reporting the mistakes is what we want to get to. So in order to have that kind of culture, you've got to create an environment where people feel safe to tell you when bad things happen and when you have near misses as well, both. So we focus on the sentinel events because you have to deal with it. They very often become public. But there's a whole lot of times during the day that you almost harmed a patient. And everybody goes, whew, that was a close call. And they move on and forget about it. But as a leader, you want to know about all those close calls because all of them represent a process problem that you have a chance to fix before the next close call happens, but then it's not a close call, you actually do harm. So creating an environment where people feel comfortable reporting, so you start with developing a trust relationship, getting to where people will report near misses and other kinds of activities that are creating risk for patients. You improve the process, you analyze, improve the process. People see that you took them seriously, you listened to the problem, and you took steps to correct the process. You gain more trust, you get more reporting, you get more opportunities to clean up the processes that are creating the harm. And this, I think, is at the crux in the center of continuous improvement. If you set up a system like this, and you're constantly getting the data in, you're doing the analysis, you're sharing the analysis, which is another weakness that we have in our industry, so that across the hospital, everyone understands we had this near miss, this is why it happened, here's how we did the root cause analysis, here's how we're changing the process. Everybody can learn from that. A learning organization is far less likely to have as much harm as a non-learning organization. And if you do all of that, you're probably going to be in better shape in terms of continuous quality improvement, but also ready for the survey if you're choosing to be accredited. The next time the team comes in, you've done the work because once you do if you work on processes, you're working on policies and you're working on procedures, and that's really what's in the standards. That's the crux of it. So my message today is that the whole concept of a continuous healthcare improvement system is based on the leadership team. The people in charge, the board, the CEO, the C-suite, and how they communicate both verbally and non-verbally all the cues about how important it is to be a safe organization. And so you need, I think, to start to take stock of what it is you're doing on a day-to-day basis and how much of an influence do you think you're having in terms of promoting patient safety. I have 2 minutes left. And I would get fired if I didn't talk about, there's a couple of things that leaders need to know in the new standards, the 6th edition. And this is for anybody in healthcare, you don't have to be accredited. One is that we're really getting serious about plans when there's renovation going on, because when you do construction and renovation, there's a whole set of risks that don't exist when you're not, and so we're asking for plans to demonstrate that you understand those risks. And the next one I've been talking a lot about everywhere, and we had a big event in the last couple of months. Simon, where's Simon Nugent? We were on the phone talking about different ideas that we could use for the speech today. One was to even focus on cybersecurity. Within 24 hours, that major hacking event that hit most of the European hospitals occurred. So what we're asking in the standards beginning on July 1st is that if your whole system goes down, what's your backup plan for taking care of patients the day that happens? Have you thought that through? Have you started to think about cybersecurity? And one of the things I ask everybody now is, have you done a password audit on your employees? Show of hands, who knows what their password profile looks like in their organization? If you want to get scared, because we did it, We did that a few years ago at the Joint Commission because we have very serious responsibilities in the United States, and we take your privacy as customers extremely seriously. We did a password audit of our employees. The number of people that had password as their password was just mind-boggling. I mean, you would think common sense. Don't think that your people, number one is password, number two is their birth date, and number three is Fluffy the cat. So you've got to start to do those basic audits. They're very easy to do. Your IT department tomorrow could tell you what your number one, your number two, and number three passwords are among your employees. And if number one is password, you're not ready for the next cybersecurity attack by any means. So think about this issue. It's starting to take up a lot of space among a lot of leaders' times in terms of what we have to do. So it's very hard work. And I want you to know that we at the Joint Commission, myself and the team, what we do is extremely hard. It's very complicated. And, just being here this morning, you're under tremendous stress in this country with just the capacity issues and the financial issues. It's very, very difficult to focus on some of the things that I've talked about today, and we appreciate that. But it's a key part of what you do as well. And these are hard jobs, but we have to keep trying. It's a journey, patient safety. It's not a project, it's something that we do constantly. And hopefully JCI can be helpful to you as you think through these problems going forward. So I appreciate your attention today and look forward to talking with some of you. Thank you.